we're going to start here. So we kind of have our kind of layout here. So what we're going to be working with today is, any time of entertainment venue here. So we're going to have 4 different zones. Each one of them is going to have a selector in it that we can choose between one of 4 sources. And then each zone will also have a gain block that we can control volume and mute and stuff like that. So what we're going to go through is we're going to build a centralized set of controls that we can select the zone, select the source within that zone, and then also control volume up and down. So we're going to do this all in Lua with our text controller block. So first thing I'm going to do is let's go ahead and we'll build our controls out. So first thing I'm going to grab is I'm going to come over here into my component section and I'm going to grab a router and get this out of the way. So that's going to be 4 inputs and 1 output. And so now we have a selection for each of our sources within our zone. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that a couple times. All right, and then I'm also going to go ahead, just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to pull out our selection block so we can see what source each one of our routers is on. And then once I've done that, I'm going to go over here and grab gain block for each section as well. And first thing I'm going to do is because we're not going to use a fader in here, we're going to use a volume up and down button. So there's an easy way to kind of modify this block. So you can see right now just has a knob that we can use variable gain with whether we change this to a slider or a fader or however we want to present this on the UCI. But if we come over to our gain and we come over to this section under properties, it says enable ramp controls. If we change this to yes, you notice now we get some options down here at the bottom for increasing and decreasing our gain here, and then also a hold in time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for this one. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to pull out my mute button here, and I'm also going to pull in my gain, and we're going to modify that here in just a minute. But what we'll do first is let's add in a couple more. So you can see right now our presentation of the gain is as a knob. I don't want to be able to control it here, but I do want to see what the value is. So if I come over here, I can change this to a text field. And now I'll be able to see exactly what that gain level is at on each one of these. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for all 3 of them here. My OCD won't let these be all out of whack, so I'm going to throw them together. And then last thing, we're just going to connect these up here. Okay, so now that we have all of our controls here, we are going to add in our text controller. So if I come over here to my schematic elements and I type in text under scripting components, we will add our text controller. So this is where we're going to be doing all of our controls. So first thing I want to do though is I want to talk about a few things within Designer that we're going to be using. So with text controller, there is a way that you can make the VS Code environment live inside of Q-SYS. So by default, this script editor right here is set to legacy. if you change this to VS Code, you get all the kind of quick shortcuts and autofills and prompts and stuff like that. So I highly recommend if you're going to be using text controller that you change this over to VS Code. And then once you do that, the IDE environment inside the text controller will update for you. And then our first thing that we're going to do now is we're going to allow these blocks to be controlled by this text controller. So by default, the script access is shut off on these blocks, and this text controller cannot see them. So what we want to do is we want to come over to our script access over here on the right, and you can see the code name right here is router 8x8, and this one's 8x8 -1. Now, obviously, that's not a great name. It's going to be hard to remember what the heck that is supposed to mean. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to update these and call this dining router. And once I do that, if I click enter, you'll notice how script access turns to all. So there's 4 basic styles or ways that we can access script through this block. So first one is all, meaning that internally and externally this can be controlled. We can also do external control, which means through our QDP protocol, you can connect into the core and you can access this script through that. None, which is the default setting. So that would just shut off script access completely. And then script, which would be only internal. So only scripts internal to QSYS can access it. I'm just going to leave it to all. I usually do, unless there's a reason that you don't want it to be accessible outside of QSYS. I would just go ahead and do the same. And then let's go ahead and do that for the rest of ours. So our router. Patio router. And then our last one's going to be private. And then we need to do the same thing with our gains here. So let's go ahead. Dining gain. Then our final one is going to be private. Cool. So now that we have each of these accessible to script access, now we're going to be able to control them. So what we'll do here is let's open up our text controller. And if you haven't seen this block before, there's a few kind of, I guess, quirks to it or things that you need to be aware of. So first control, which is going to be the most important one, is this plus sign right here. This is how we're going to be able to add new controls to our selection list. So first thing we want to do is we want to have our 4 buttons so we can select our dining, our bar, our patio, and our private area. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is hit the plus sign. And what that'll do is it'll create a new control. And I'm going to label this zone select. And by default, when these come in, they are toggle buttons. That's what we're going to leave this as because we want to be able to toggle between the zones. But you'll notice here there is a count number. So right now this is just a single control. Obviously I could add another one. I could say zone select 2, or I could label it dining or bar. But what we can do here by increasing this count to 4 is we've now made one control with 4 toggle buttons inside of it, basically making an array of controls. And so now we can use those to interact with each other. So this style here obviously keeps this list cleaner, but it also makes our programming a lot easier on the backside. So we're going to have 2 sets of those. So first one's going to be our zone select. Our second one's going to be our source select. So source select. And that's also going to be a toggle button. And we are going to count that to 4 as well. Our next control is going to be our mute button. So let's call this mute. And mute buttons are toggles as well. And then we need our volume up and down buttons. So let's go ahead and add that. Let's call this gain change. Oops, spell it right. Gain change. And we don't want the gain adjustments up or down to be toggles because we don't want to lock in. We just want to know when we press it and release it. So we are going to use a different type of button here called a momentary button. So basically what this means is while I have my finger on it, it's true. When I release it, it goes false. Obviously with a toggle, if I put my finger on it, it locks in as true. If I release it, it stays that way until I press it again, then release it, then it goes false again. For quick volume adjustments up or down, we don't want that to toggle in, so we're going to use momentary, and we want 2 of them. Now I want to replicate this gain over here. So the way that we can do that is we can actually make a text box over here that's going to take that gain and match it over when we select the right zone. So let's call this gain display. Now there are a couple different options with text inside of the or representing text inside of the text controller. Obviously there is a text category and we can do text box. What this is though is a user defined field. So if I click on it, it's going to pop open a keyboard. I can type right into it. Obviously we don't want them to be able to type into this box. So there's another category called the indicator, and we can use text for that as well. So this is a locked box that is just going to be a text display. And that's what we want to do here is just display the gain from each one of these as we select the zone. And then our last one is, let's give them a meter so they can see exactly the gain level that they're at. And then that one, what we're going to do is also going to be an indicator. But then we're going to represent that as a meter. Now, your other options that I didn't talk about here is the control pins. So if we need to control these outside of this block, we have input output in both, just like you would have if you exposed your gain pin on here. So you'd notice if I hit out, now I get 4 pins out for 1, 2, 3, and 4 on there. So just be aware that if you do need to set that control out to control another block, whether it be through, this would be through the control pins. Obviously, we can control other text controllers through script access as well, but this would be a way to expose those pins out to the outside world. All right, so now that we have all of our controls here, first thing we're going to do is let's hit this pencil button. And what that does is it opens up our script editor. So once this loads up here, you'll be able to see, and now we can start typing. So first thing that I'm going to do inside of here is we need to create our tables with our names in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use TBL for a table, and we'll call this zones. And then we're going to create a table by using our parenthesis bracket. And we are going to have our 4 zones. So if you remember back here, we have dining, bar, patio, and private. So the way I create an entry in here is I am going to just type in dining. So that's text. So I surrounded it with our quotes. And then let's do bar, patio. And then our last one's going to be private. So now I have a table with entry 1 is dining, entry 2 is bar, entry 3 is patio, and entry 4 is private. So then we're going to need some sources for each one. So let's go ahead and create our sources list. All right, let's do music. Probably need bar TV. Oops. Oh, let's do a wall plate for our band. And then our last one, we'll go way back and do an iPod. So now we have our 4 sources for that we're going to be selecting through. And now we're going to do a kind of a cool trick here is, you know how earlier we went through and we named our blocks, dining router, bar router, patio router, private router, same thing with our gains. We can actually make a table of what those names are. So that way it's going to be easier for us to access those. So instead of having to type the name in here, we can actually create a table of those names. So I like to, just because case matters. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to come over here and copy these out of here. So when I create my script names, I'm very particular about making sure I don't add spaces or dots, or you can do whatever you want, but just know that it is case sensitive and character sensitive. So if you add in a period and forget to type it in over here, you're going to spend a long time trying to figure out why it's not working. By eliminating some of the complexity, it makes it a little bit easier to not have to worry about those things later. So now I have my table of my routers, and let's do our router or our gain names now. So it's table of gain names, table. Dining gain. And notice how I'm lining these up here. So dining comes first in zone, dining comes first in router, dining comes first in gain. That will be important here in a little bit when we get into mapping our tables together. So obviously I know what I want to do here, but I would, if you're doing this in the field with, obviously this is not this is something you could replicate for sure, but obviously your circumstances are going to change depending on what you're trying to do. So spend some time kind of going through and figuring out what you want to do and how you want to do it. Because obviously if I put, patio in the first part of this zone, when I hit that, now I can't use that index number to associate the 3 together. But if I obviously put them in the
Yeah, you've got some questions coming in here, Tyler. So I think first we'll start with line 3 and 4, both say table gain names. So one should be table router, one should be table gains. Thank you, Andrew, for that. Andre noticed it as well. Thank you, Andre. And Timur has asked, could you fill in the names dynamically? And he's given an example there. So
let me see what. Yeah. Could you fill in the names dynamically? As in table zones 0 plus router plus gain, etc. Yes, if you used, I see what you're asking. Yes. So you could do them dynamic that way. You would have to then access them appropriately by doing a table insert command and then adding the gain and router to the end of them. So yes, you could make this dynamic. Obviously, that would be helpful if, let's say I want to expand the zone selection or I want to expand the sources. Obviously, we could do it that way. Just depending on how your name is, you do obviously have to make sure the code name matches. But absolutely, you could do this dynamically by adding in that dining plus the router or gain. We would just have to do a table insert command rather than how you are referencing it. But there are definitely different ways to do this. The other way we could possibly do this is we could say table zones 1 and then add router to the end of it. I'm not sure how much time that would actually save just because the code is almost the same length. But a lot of scripting is for sure like, we'll go through this and then we're like, oh, maybe this would be more efficient. And so then we kind of redo it and say, okay, let's do it this way now. So a lot of code is iterative for sure. As you get through there, you kind of look at different parts and you're like, oh, well, maybe I should do it that way, or maybe I should do it that way. So yeah, yeah, just like Jeff said, the concatenating the strings together instead of just adding in a table insert, you could do dining plus router, dining plus game.
Thank you.
All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to fill in our labels on our buttons here. So actually, what I'm going to do first before we get to this section is I'm going to pull these out so that way we can see them on our page a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and resize these. Mouse is not being hacked. There we go. Okay, so now we have our selection of sources or our zones. Let's do the same thing with our sources. Um, just for fun, I'm going to add my label here so we know what these are. And last thing I'm gonna do is let's go in and add in our, that's gonna be up, down, mute. Will be our gain. Let's add in our text box. Okay. Okay. All right. So now that we have all of our controls out there, now what we're going to do is we're going to write a loop to go through our table and grab the labels out of there and pop them on top of our buttons here. So what we're going to use here is this loop is going to be an iPairs loop. And so the syntax for that is going to be our for loop, and then we're going to say for index and controls in iPairs. And we are going to run that control on our zones. So the way we access that is we'll open up our controls table and we're going to look for our zone select. So that is our zone select right here. Now we don't need an index. It's going to prompt you for an index because it's an array. But we're going to run it on the entire controls. So, and then we are going to grab in our control here. So every time this runs, it's going to run through here. And the first time it's going to run, we're going to get the first control, which is going to be our first button, second button, third, fourth. So we want to access this control here. So if we say control dot, and then the way we grab the label of the button is dot legend. Let's say CTL dot legend. And then we are going to set that equal to our table zones. And we're going to basically, as we get the first one, we want dining. So if we do table zones, and then we want to access the first time it runs, we want the first one. So second, third, and so on. So if we do IDX like this, then when it runs through here, we are going to get that here. So if I go ahead and hit save, let's emulate this. You can see it live. And there you go. So basically we took our labels here and it popped them right on top of our buttons here. So the other thing we want to do is we want to make sure when this starts up that we set these all the buttons to false. So we can do this really easily by accessing the Boolean of the control, just like we did the legend, but now the Boolean, and we can just say false. So now if one of them is true, let's just say the patio is true, next time the script starts, it will set it to false. So we'll reset it back to the way we had it before. So now that we did that for our zones, let's do the same thing for our sources. But then this time we're going to do it on our source select. Let's do the same thing here. So let's do ctl.legend is equal to our table of sources. We also want the index, just like that. And then when we save it, now we get all of our selections here as well. All right, so now we have a couple more things that we need to do just to kind of get everything started here. So we need to add labels to our other buttons so we can access our controls. And let's do our zone mute first. What's going to be our legend. And we want that to say mute. And then we can do the same thing here with our gain change, which is our volume up and down buttons. But you'll notice here, once I hit that, because it's an array of controls, we do have two options. So we have the first and the second button. So let's make the first button and access its legend, and we'll label that one up. And then let's do the same thing, but with our second one. And let's label that one down. All right. So now that we have those in there, if we hit save, now you'll notice we have all of our buttons here as well. So now we're going to get into kind of the meat and potatoes of our script here. So we're going to run a kind of a really big loop over everything as far as when things change. This will go into effect or that will go into effect. So what we're going to do is we are going to create an iPairs loop for our zone select. So what I can do here is I'm going to say for, and you'll notice that I can keep using the same IDX CTL. These are just variables. You could use I, C, Q, R, whatever variable you want. But because these are in their own functions, I can continue to reuse this IDX CTL in each one. So let's run our iPairs loop again. And this time we are going to run this on our controls.zone select. So basically what I'm saying is anytime, whenever one of these buttons change here, we're going to do something with that. And the way that we do that inside of Lua is through what's called an event handler. So what I could say is our control, so whichever button, CTL, and then we're going to create our event handler off of that. And that's going to be a function. And I am going to then add some commands in here. You'll notice that every time that I am starting a statement, I'm ending it. I would definitely get into a habit of that. If you are not going to, if you don't end these, you could get, and you'll see here as we get to the end of this, that if you have a whole bunch of statements inside of other statements, you're going to start getting really complex, and you're going to, at the end of it, you're going to be like, oh, where's that end, or where's that end? You have no idea how many times I've helped other people with their code, and at the bottom of their code, I just see end, all in a row. Please don't do that. Yes, it will function, but it's not very clean code, and it's very hard to troubleshoot later on. So get into a habit of ending your statements when you start them, just to make sure that everything is set up properly. All right, so now we're going to basically what we're doing here is we're going to make interlocking buttons to start with. So what we're going to do is we're going to run another loop on our array of controls. But because we're running the same loop again, we do need to use different variables this time. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a 2 to the end of each one. So I pairs. Let's do controls, zone select again. And what this is going to allow us to do, just typed in here before I get too far. What this is going to allow us to do is we're going to know when the first button's pressed, and then we're going to run that loop again, and then we're going to basically see, does button 1 equal button 1? Does button 2 equal button 2? And as we go through this list, we'll be able to then set the Boolean value based off of that. So what I can do is if I come down here and say ctl2.boolean, so we're going to set the Boolean, and then this is going to be a very easy syntax of, does index 1 equal index 2? If it does, this will be true. If it doesn't, this will be false. So basically, is 1 and 1 equal to each other? Yep, okay, leave that one as true, set the rest of them to false. And we can keep going through that list over and over and over again.
Hey, Tyler, I think you wrote index equals equals. I'm not sure if that was supposed to say 1 equals.
So you need equals to each other, so that's a comparator. If I just have one equal sign, I'm setting index 1 equal to index 2, which I don't want to do. I want to know if index 1 is equal to index 2. And if that's the case, this will return true or false. And so now you can see as I click through here, these are essentially interlocking buttons now. So
Thank you.
pretty quick, easy code to make your buttons interlock with each other. So every time I'm clicking these, we're running through this list and it's saying, oh, is 1 equal to 1? Yep, okay. Is 1 equal to 2? No. Is 1 equal to 3? No. Is 1 equal to 4? No. And so it's essentially setting everything else to false. So that's a pretty easy way to run through some code just to interlock your buttons together. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of jump down here and we're going to go through, and what we want to do is we want to enable and disable our buttons based on if we're pressing them or not. So I don't want these buttons to be enabled until I have one of our zones selected. So I want you to have to hit bar first when the script starts before you can select the source and change the volume. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to come up here and let's go ahead and disable our buttons. So let's do controls dot zone mute, and this one is disabled is the command to disable the button. And if it is disabled, that would mean that it would be equal to true. Now let's do the same thing again here. So let's do controls dot gain change 1. That is disabled. Set that one to true. And then same thing here, controls dot gain change 2. Disabled. Oops. And then let's do our gain display and our meter as well. So let's do gain display dot is disabled. Meter. All right, so we've set all of our controls to be disabled. So you'll see here, all of those are disabled. Now what we're going to do is we want to set our gain display and our meter to a default value. So that way, if someone has selected, let's say the dining room, but then when we restart, it sets back up to the bar, let's say. We want to make sure that this gets cleared out every time we do that. So we can do this through setting a blank string to our gain display. So if we go to gain display, our string is our value inside that box. And all we have to do is just set a blank string, just like that. So let's do our last one here, which is going to be our gain meter. And a meter, we are adjusting its value. And it's in decibels, so I'm just going to set it to -100, just so we zero that meter all the way down to the bottom. All right. So now let's come back into our loop here. And what we want to happen every time someone hits one of those buttons is we want to re-enable our buttons here. So if we come over here, we can do the opposite of each one of these. So I'm just going to go ahead and save some time, and I'm going to paste all of these. I would also keep your indentation. If you don't do that, it's going to be a pain later to try to troubleshoot. So make sure you keep your scripts all lined up correctly. So I'm setting all of these to false now, which basically is going to re-enable them. Perfect. So now what I want to do is when I hit one of these buttons, I want to take the string and set it to our selected gain. So if I do this, and let's do our gain display first. So we're going to say controls dot gain display dot string. And what we're going to do is we're going to, because we know which selected gain we had. So what I can do here is I am going to, oh, I skipped a step. Oops. Hold on 1 second. Sorry. I don't want to confuse you. So let me go back up here. What we want to do here is we want to know which zone we've selected so that we know which router and gain block that we're using. So what I can do here is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to create a variable called selected gain. And the way that we access a control outside through a name control is through the command of component.new. And we then can come up here and access our table of router names and our table of gain names. So the first one's going to be our gain. So if I come in here and I do table of gain names, and what I want to access is, let's say if I press 1, I want to that's the dining room. So I want to access the dining gain block here. So the way I can do that is by adding in our index. So now when I hit dining room, I'm selecting the dining room gain block. I can do the same thing here for our routers. So let's do selected router. That's going to be component.new. This is going to be table of router names. And then I also want the index. So now when the first one's selected, I get the first router control, second router control, and so on. And so that makes it really easy now to set our display and our meter and associate our volume buttons and stuff like that with each one of ours. What I want to do is I want to get this string over into this box. And so
there's a question from Emily saying, don't you actually want IDX2, index 2?
it really doesn't matter in this case. IDX1 and IDX2 are actually the same. So I'm running this loop a second time on here so that I can evaluate IDX to IDX2. So IDX1 and IDX2 will actually return the same value, which is why when we run through this and I can do my interlocking selection, because 1 is equal to 1, which would return true, which would make the Boolean true. But if 1 is 1 ever equal to 2? No, that would make it false, which is why it makes the other buttons go false. So good question.
Thank you. And thank you, Emily.
All right, so what I want to do is I want to get this gain selection out of this block and into our string over here. And so there's a really easy way that we can look at a controls. There is a tool called View Component Controls Info. And so what we can do is we'll just kind of leave this here. If you click on a block, I now can see each one of my selections. So bypass, gain, invert, mute, decrease, and you'll notice there's one here called gain. And so what I can do is now I know what control I want to grab out of there. So I want to grab the gain selection. So what I want to do is I want my selected gain. So selected gain here. And then the way that I'm going to access this is dot gain, as I'm accessing this. And then I want it as a string. So I'm going to say string. Just like that. So now whenever I select it, whichever one's selected, that string will populate inside that box. Now I want to do the same thing for my meter. So I'm going to do controls dot gain meter. Now this one is going to be a value. And this one's also going to be selected gain dot gain, but this one is going to be the value of that. So I'm going to grab the value out of this, which is just the integer. Negative 100 through 20 is the default, and it's going to populate it on this list here. So, and then last one that we need to do is our mute button. So we're going to say controls dot zone mute. This one's just going to be a true false, so that's going to be our Boolean. So this is also going to be selected gain. But we don't want to look at the gain now. We want to look at the mute. So our code name right here is mute. So we're going to say mute. And then what part of the control tree we want? We want the Boolean. So now what we want to do is we have all of our selections here. So now you'll notice as we change here, you'll notice that each one of these okay. Make sure. Did I mistype that? I must have. Let's see what I mistyped something. Okay. Well, let's troubleshoot together. So something in here is not happy. Let's see. Patio gain.
That gain block doesn't have script access. Could that be?
There it is. I knew what to do with that block. I just couldn't figure out exactly what it was. Thank you.
Yeah.
See, we're not all perfect. All right. So now you'll notice here. So let's open this up. Let me just change this one just show something different than the others. So now you can see here, those are all the same. And now when I come over here, this one shows -25 and the mute's engaged. So now we're displaying what we want to see, but we do need to add in the rest of our controls here. So let's go ahead and let's, come on, there we go. Okay, let's write a for loop here, but this one's going to be just a very simple one. Basically what we want to do is every time we select a new zone, we want to set the sources all to false first, and then we'll go through and set it to the appropriate one after we do that. So that way we start in kind of a known state. So I'm just going to use the variable j here. And then, so basically what this is a loop from 1 to however many controls there are in our sources list. And there's a really easy way to access this is if we use our # here and we say controls dot source select. So what that did is it just said however many controls are in source select, we're going to run that from 1 to 4. And then every time we run through that, so we're going to do it 4 times, what we're going to do is, MS first, we're going to come in here and we're going to do controls dot source select. And we want J because we want to run through it 1, 2, 3, 4 different times. And we're just going to set the Boolean of that to false. So that way, if one of them was true, it's now going to be false every time we run this script. So if I hit this, you'll see how they all go to false. So now I'm gonna move a little quicker because we're getting a little short on time here. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run through and we're going to do our source select here. So I'm going to say controls dot source select. And the index we want is our selected router. So we're going to say selected router. And the value out of our selected router that we want is here. So if I go here, we want this selection, which is our select.1. So let's say select.1, just like that. And we want value. And then we're going to set a Boolean. Just like that. So now what we want to know is we want to know when the selected gain changes. So what we can do here is we can say selected gain dot gain. And then we want to know that it changed. So any change inside of Lua is an event handler. So let's set that to our function. And then we're going to pass in a variable of CTL. And what this does is inside of here, what this is saying is every time this changes, what is the gain change is going to be now referenced as control. So this makes it a lot easier rather than having to keep type this out over and over again. We can kind of shorthand this and make it a little bit easier. So we're going to pass in that. So what we want to do is we want to set our gain display string equal to CTL.string. And then we want to set our meter.value is equal to CTL.value. So now every time that gain changes, we're going to update the string and the value with it. Right. Now, the next thing I want to know is when we hit the up or down buttons. So I'm going to say control.gain change, and we'll just start with 1. Let's do our event handler off of that. Create our function. Control. End it. And our way that we're going to know this is by hitting one of these buttons here. And so that's going to be, this is going to be our up button. So this is going to be step or increase. So what I can do is let's access our selected gain. This is going to be stepper increase. And we want to know it's true, false. So say the Boolean. And then we're going to set that equal to Boolean. Now let's do that again for our down. So gain change to Boolean. Oops. Through the function. That. Selected gain. Oops, it's case sensitive, so make sure you get that equal to CTL dot Boolean as well. So now we've done our up and our down buttons. Get close to the end here. So last thing we need to do is our mute button. So let's do controls dot so mute dot Boolean. And then this one, oops, sorry. Skipped ahead of me. Event handler. Function. Thank you. That's what happens when I try to go too fast. We would have found out here in a minute. All right, so controls down there. And that. And then now we're going to say selected gain dot mute is equal to CTL. So now every time the mute button changes, we copy the mute over to the mute button of our selected gain. Cool. All right, so last thing we need to do is we need to do our source selection. So let's do another iPairs loop. Dot after selected gain for both steppers. Selected gain. Oh, so I think you're asking about here. No, so when you're accessing a control within a block, you do not need a leading period before them. Because what we're doing here is we're technically, because this has a dot inside of it, we can't just use dot stepper dot decrease dot Boolean. So we're actually escaping the name here with our bracket and parentheses. So this right here and this right here are technically the same type of call, but because we're escaping it, we don't need the leading dot here. So this notation is actually called syntactic sugar, and it makes things a lot easier through script access. But so when you are naming these blocks, just be careful of what you're naming. Obviously, these are built in, so we can't really do anything about these ones. But if you're naming your own ones, spaces, capitals, dots, those type of things are going to take a little bit more syntax to write out. So just be aware of that when you're doing it. Obviously, if there's a reason for it, go ahead. But it does make it a little bit quicker to write out. So
Would you recommend using like an underscore instead of a dot?
even if you use an underscore, you still need to escape it. So if it's not just a single word across, you do have to escape it. So you can't do selected gain dot stepper underscore increase because it uses a special character. It does have to be escaped.
Thank you, Tyler.
Yep. All right. So last one I'm going to do is we're going to say for index and value. I'm just using different variables here just to prove a point. You could use CTX control again if you wanted to. So we're doing, we're going to run this iPairs loop on our controls dot source select array or table. And we're going to do that. Go ahead and end it. And we're going to do the same thing above. So we want to do interlocking buttons here. But first thing we want to do is we want to, what did I forget? Sorry, hold on one second. I think I forgot a step somewhere. Oh, ha, 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 ha. Okay. Up here, what I'm going to do is this is our source selection button. So what I want to do is I'm going to run through this loop and I'm going to do the same thing we did before. So we're going to say our Boolean is equal to false. And we're going to say CTL dot is disabled. And we're going to set them all to true. And what this will do is it sets them all to false and sets the disabled state to true until we select the zone. And that's what's going to happen down here in our iPairs loop. So first step inside of here is we want to go in here and we're going to say V, which is our control, dot is disabled. And we're going to set that to false. So whichever one is selected, we're going to, whenever we select the zone, we're going to enable all of the buttons. And then we want to know which button was pressed. So we're going to say v dot event handler. And let's go ahead and create a function for that. End it. And then same thing that we did up top. Let's run another loop on there so we know which one we can compare it to a different one. So let's say there's controls dot source select you. Then just like we did, so the v2 dot boolean is equal to v2. Wow. Oh, that's wrong. I want the index, not the value. I'm going to say v2 is, so now we'll compare 1 to 1. Is it true? Yep. Okay, set that one to true and set the rest to false. All right, last thing we need to do here is we want to take our selected router and we want to take that value. So we want to say, remember that was select.1, which was right here, which is our integer output. Say dot value. And we're going to set that equal to I. So whenever 1 is pressed, we're going to take that router and set it equal to that. Now, if I didn't mess anything up, this should work the way that it's supposed to. Yeah, there we go. Now you can see when I change that here, so we can adjust these. So let's go through, let me go ahead and adjust these to different levels so we can see kind of a change here. Let's go ahead and mute that guy up there. So now as you can see, if I hit dining, we have source number 4 select, it maps the gain over. If I hit bar, changes that. We're on input 2 there, so let's go ahead and change that to 3. This one's back on 1, that gain follows. And then if I go here, we'll select 3. So you can see as I change these, you can see the value over here on the left change with it. And then when I hit that, it goes back and everything propagates correctly. All right, that was a lot to get through in an hour. So this file, is email, yes. Yes, so what will happen is there will be a follow-up email to this webinar, and this file will be included in there for you guys, so you can reference it, use it for whatever you want. You can look at the script, the code in here, and how we did things. So yes, you will get a copy of this in the follow-up email. If there's any other questions, go ahead and include those in the Q&A. I will be around here. We'll hang out here for a couple more minutes just in case there's anything that comes up. But thank you guys so much for your time today. I know that in the AV field there is a lot of a lot of need for you being different places. So I really appreciate you guys spending the time with us to learn. If you need to any questions that come up or anything like that, my contact will be included in the email as well. So feel free to reach out. Each one of you should have an applications engineer that's also in your area. So I'm part of this central region, but we have applications engineers all over the US or Canada or Europe or wherever you need. So thank you guys so much for your time today.
Larry is asking, is it possible to provide comments in the script as well as on what each line does?
Yeah, so the one that I will send out to you has each line commented with what we're actually doing. So it will be, but just so if everyone wants to see, so in Lua, all you have to do is hit the two dashes here, and then you can type whatever you want, and that is a comment for that line. So you know, on here I could put table of name or zones, something like that. Oh. And so you can type out at the end of each line, so you can comment out. That's very important and very smart to do, especially because, let's be honest, most of the time you're probably going to write this, and then 3 years later, someone else is going to look at it and be like, "What the heck were they doing?" You have comments in there; they're going to know exactly what's going on. So, but yes, the code that you will be supplied with does have comments in it of exactly what's happening. So. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and end this. Thank you guys again for all your time today, and hopefully you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. This is great. And thank you everyone for joining.